If you're really pregnant, your body will protect the baby. Those were the words my husband said seconds before everything in my life changed. I still remember the sound of Claire laughing behind me. Not loudly. Not hysterically. Just a quiet little laugh, like she was watching someone spill wine at a dinner party instead of watching her own sister lose trust in the two people closest to her. The hardwood stairs beneath my feet blurred for a moment, and then there was silence. Cold, terrible silence. I pressed both hands against my stomach before I even realized I was crying. Ryan stood frozen near the top of the staircase, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling like he was the victim in all of this. Claire leaned against the hallway wall wearing my grey cardigan, the one she used to borrow when we were teenagers. "Ryan," I whispered, barely able to breathe, "why would you do that?" He looked down at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger. Not guilt. Worse. Suspicion. "Because I'm tired of being manipulated, Evelyn," he said quietly. I needed to know if any of this was real. Real. As if the past 3 months of nausea, doctor appointments, and sleepless nights had all been part of some elaborate performance. As if the tiny ultrasound photo sitting on our refrigerator meant nothing. Claire crossed her arms and avoided my eyes. "You've been acting emotional for weeks," she muttered. "Ryan's confused too." I stared at her. My younger sister. The same girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because she was scared of the dark. The same girl who cried in my arms after her college boyfriend left her. She wouldn't even look at me now. That hurt more than anything else. Outside, rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm echoed through the neighborhood before fading away again. Everything felt strangely normal, and I think that was the most terrifying part. The world hadn't stopped. The neighbors were probably making dinner. Someone down the street was probably walking their dog. Meanwhile, I was lying at the bottom of my own staircase wondering when my marriage had turned into something cold and unrecognizable. Ryan finally walked down a few steps toward me, cautious, almost irritated. "You're fine," he said. "See? If there was really a problem, you'd know." I couldn't answer him. My throat burned too badly. Claire disappeared into the kitchen, and a second later I heard the refrigerator open. Ice clinked against glass. She was making herself a drink. I closed my eyes for a moment and tried to steady my breathing. That was when I realized something that frightened me even more than what had just happened. Neither of them looked shocked. Neither of them looked horrified by the situation unfolding in front of them. It felt rehearsed. Like this conversation had started long before tonight. Like I was the only one who hadn't known my life was already falling apart. And somewhere deep inside me, underneath the fear and confusion and heartbreak, something colder began to wake up. Because in that moment, lying there with my hand over my stomach, I realized one thing with absolute certainty. My husband no longer saw me as someone he loved. And my sister had been helping him stop loving me for a very long time. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. I sat alone beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and exhausted, twisting the thin hospital bracelet around my wrist while rain streaked down the windows outside. A nurse had brought me warm tea almost 20 minutes earlier, but it sat untouched beside me, already cold. My hand still would not stop trembling. Every few minutes, I rested my palm against my stomach without thinking, waiting for reassurance that everything was still okay. The doctor had told me the baby was stable. Stable. Such a strange word for something so fragile. Ryan paced near the vending machines at the end of the hallway, speaking quietly into his phone. I could not hear every word, but I heard my name enough times to know the conversation was about me. Claire sat nearby scrolling through social media like we were waiting for delayed luggage at an airport instead of sitting in a hospital after one of the worst nights of my life. She did not cry once. That was what I kept noticing. She never cried. When Ryan finally walked back over, he looked tired in the carefully practiced way people look when they want sympathy. His dark blue sweater was damp from the rain outside, and his wedding ring caught the overhead light as he folded his arms across his chest. "The doctor said stress can affect pregnancy symptoms," he said quietly. "Maybe we all overreacted tonight." I stared at him in disbelief. Overreacted? As if the entire evening had simply been a misunderstanding that polite people should move past. Claire finally looked up from her phone. "Ryan is just worried about you," she said softly. "You have been acting different lately." I almost laughed at how gentle her voice sounded. Anyone listening from nearby would have thought she was a loving younger sister trying to comfort me. They would not have seen the small glance she shared with Ryan afterward. Quick. Familiar. Practiced. Something inside my chest tightened painfully. I suddenly remembered all the little moments I had ignored during the past few months. Claire showing up unannounced with takeout for Ryan when I was too sick to cook. The late-night conversations in the kitchen that stopped the second I walked downstairs. Ryan defending her constantly, even when she said cruel things disguised as jokes. At the time, I convinced myself I was emotional because of the pregnancy. That was what Ryan kept telling me. "Your hormones are making you paranoid." I heard that sentence so many times it started living inside my head. A doctor finally stepped out into the hallway holding a clipboard. My entire body stiffened. "Mrs. Carter," he asked gently. I stood so quickly my knees nearly gave out. Ryan moved beside me immediately, placing one hand against my back as if he were a devoted husband. "The baby is okay," the doctor said with a reassuring smile. "But you need rest. No unnecessary stress. No heavy lifting. And absolutely no emotional strain if possible." Emotional strain. I almost wanted to ask him how exactly a woman was supposed to avoid emotional strain when the people closest to her were slowly making her feel insane. Ryan thanked the doctor before I could speak. Claire stood and grabbed my coat from the chair beside her. "Let us get you home," she said. Home. The word settled heavily in my stomach. Because for the first time since moving into that house 3 years ago, I realized something terrifying. I no longer felt safe there. And judging by the calm look that passed between my husband and my sister as we walked toward the parking garage together, I was beginning to understand that they preferred it that way. The drive home felt longer than usual. Rainwater slid across the windshield in slow waves while Ryan kept both hands tightly on the steering wheel, his expression unreadable beneath the passing streetlights. Claire sat in the back seat even though she normally insisted on riding in the front whenever she visited. The silence inside the car felt deliberate, heavy enough to press against my chest. I leaned my head against the cool window glass and watched familiar neighborhoods blur past in shades of gold and gray. Somewhere downtown, neon signs flickered outside late-night diners, and couples hurried beneath umbrellas toward warm apartments and ordinary lives. I wondered what it felt like to trust the people sitting beside you. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Ryan had installed those automatic lights last winter after insisting the neighborhood was becoming unsafe. I almost smiled at the irony. The house looked beautiful from the outside. White shutters. Stone walkway. The maple tree in the front yard beginning to lose its leaves. Anyone passing by would have seen the home of a successful young couple preparing for their first baby. They would never have guessed how cold it felt inside. Claire unlocked the front door before Ryan even reached for his keys. That small detail settled uneasily in my mind. She moved through the house too comfortably now, like someone who no longer felt like a guest. I noticed things I had ignored before. Her favorite herbal tea sitting beside Ryan's expensive coffee machine. A cardigan draped over the dining room chair that did not belong to me. A framed photo from last summer's lake trip where Ryan stood slightly closer to Claire than he did to his own wife. Tiny things. Quiet things. But suddenly they felt impossible not to see. "You should get some sleep," Ryan said as he loosened his tie near the kitchen island. "The doctor said stress is not good for you." His voice sounded calm, patient, almost caring. It was the same tone he used whenever other people were around. The same polished voice that made everyone believe he was reasonable and dependable. I nodded without answering and slowly walked upstairs toward our bedroom. Every step felt heavier than it had the night before. At the top of the staircase, I paused for a moment, staring at the dark wooden railing beside me. My stomach tightened instantly. Ryan noticed. "Evelyn," he sighed softly, "you cannot keep acting like I tried to hurt you." I turned around slowly. Claire stood behind him in the kitchen doorway holding a glass of ice water. Watching us? Waiting. "Then why did you do it?" I asked quietly. Ryan rubbed one hand across his forehead like an exhausted parent dealing with a difficult child. "Because nothing has made sense lately," he said. "You disappear into the bathroom crying. You barely sleep. You accuse Claire and me of acting strange every time we talk. You are not yourself anymore." Claire lowered her eyes at exactly the right moment. Perfectly timed sympathy. I suddenly realized they had probably discussed these conversations before having them with me. They already knew which version of events they wanted to present. Ryan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Maybe all of this pressure is becoming too much for you emotionally." There it was again. Not concern. Not comfort. Doubt. Careful, polished doubt designed to make me question my own memory. My own instincts. My own sanity. I looked at the two of them standing together beneath the warm kitchen lights and felt something inside me go completely still. Because for the first time, I understood the real danger was not their cruelty. It was how calmly they delivered it. And somewhere deep down, I knew people who could look at you that gently while slowly destroying your sense of reality were capable of far more than they wanted you to believe. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire standing at the top of the staircase with that faint smile on her face, like she already knew how the evening would end. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest and walked downstairs wrapped in an oversized cream blanket. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. Rain still tapped softly against the windows. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment staring at the ultrasound photo attached to the refrigerator with a blue magnet from our trip to Cape Cod 2 summers ago. 8 years together. 3 years married. Thousands of tiny memories suddenly felt unstable in my mind, as if someone had quietly rearranged them while I was not looking. I made myself chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen island where Claire and Ryan had spent so many late nights talking recently. Back then, I told myself it was harmless. Ryan liked discussing business ideas, and Claire always loved listening to people who made her feel important. She had been that way since childhood. Charming. Attentive. Just vulnerable enough to make people protective of her. Especially men. I rested both hands around the warm mug and found myself thinking about our father's birthday party 10 years earlier. Claire had shown up 2 hours late wearing a red silk dress even though the invitation specifically said casual backyard barbecue. The moment she arrived, every conversation shifted toward her. She laughed louder than everyone else. Told dramatic stories about her latest breakup. Sat beside my boyfriend at the time for almost the entire evening while I refilled drinks and carried food outside. Later that night, she cried in my bedroom and claimed she did not realize he had been flirting with her all evening. I forgave her because that was what I always did. Claire made mistakes. I cleaned them up. That pattern followed us into adulthood more times than I wanted to admit. When my mother was recovering from surgery 3 years ago, Claire disappeared for almost a month because she said hospitals made her anxious. I was the one sleeping on uncomfortable waiting room chairs and organizing medication schedules while Claire posted beach photos from Miami with captions about self-care. Yet somehow, by Thanksgiving, she was still the favorite daughter because she knew how to smile at exactly the right moments. Ryan used to joke about it when we first started dating. Your sister could convince a cop to apologize while writing her a speeding ticket. Back then, we laughed together about it. Back then, I thought he loved me because I was different from her. Steady. Reliable. Safe. I heard footsteps upstairs around 4:30 in the morning. A few seconds later, Ryan walked into the kitchen wearing grey sweatpants and a black t-shirt, his hair still messy from sleep. He stopped when he saw me sitting there in the dark. "You should be in bed," he said quietly. I studied his face carefully. The same green eyes. The same wedding ring. The same familiar voice that used to calm me after difficult days. But now every expression felt rehearsed, like an actor repeating lines he no longer believed. "Did you ever love me?" I asked softly, "or did you just love being needed?" Ryan blinked in surprise. For a second, real emotion flickered across his face. Irritation. "Evelyn," he sighed, pulling out a chair across from me, "this is exactly what I mean. You are turning everything into something dramatic." Dramatic. That word again. I lowered my eyes to the untouched tea between my hands and finally understood something painful. Ryan and Claire did not need me to be unstable. They only needed everyone else to believe I was. Over the next few days, the atmosphere inside the house became strangely polite. That was the part that unsettled me the most. Ryan started asking if I needed extra pillows at night. Claire brought over homemade soup in glass containers and placed them neatly inside the refrigerator like she was auditioning to be the perfect sister. If someone had walked into our home that week, they would have seen kindness everywhere. They would have seen soft voices, concerned expressions, careful smiles. What they would not have seen was the tension humming quietly beneath every interaction. Ryan started insisting on coming to all my doctor appointments again. At first, I thought guilt might finally be catching up to him. Then I noticed how often he answered questions for me before I could speak. "She has been forgetful lately. Her moods shift very fast. She gets overwhelmed easily." The doctor usually smiled politely and continued typing into his laptop, but each sentence settled heavily in my chest. Ryan was building something. Slowly. Carefully. A version of me that sounded unstable enough for other people to doubt. Claire supported him in subtle ways. One afternoon she sat beside me on the back patio while autumn wind scattered yellow leaves across the yard. She wore oversized sunglasses even though the sky was cloudy. "Ryan is exhausted," she said softly while stirring lemon into her iced tea. "You know this pregnancy has been hard on him too." I stared at her in disbelief. Hard on him? I thought about the sleepless nights, the constant nausea, the fear that followed me everywhere now like a second shadow. Yet somehow Ryan had become the victim in everyone's story except my own. Claire reached across the table and touched my wrist gently. "I think you should talk to someone professionally," she added. "Just for emotional support." There it was again. That careful little suggestion. Therapy. Emotional instability. Exhaustion. They repeated the same ideas so often it almost sounded reasonable after a while. I understood then how easy it was to make someone question themselves without ever raising your voice. A few nights later, I woke up around midnight thirsty and walked downstairs toward the kitchen. The house was dark except for the small pendant lights above the island. As I reached the hallway, I heard voices. Ryan and Claire. I stopped before they noticed me. "She is becoming suspicious," Claire whispered. "Then we stick to the plan," Ryan replied calmly. My entire body went still. "What if she checks your phone?" Claire asked nervously. Ryan gave a quiet laugh. "She will not. Evelyn still wants to believe people are good." The silence that followed felt endless. Then I heard something else. A soft sound. Familiar. The sound of Ryan kissing someone gently on the forehead. My stomach dropped so suddenly I had to grip the hallway wall to steady myself. "Once the baby is born," Claire whispered, "everything changes anyway." Ryan lowered his voice too much after that for me to hear clearly, but I caught fragments. Lawyer. Custody. Medical records. Stress concerns. I backed away slowly before they could see me standing there in the dark. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the glass of water sitting on the hallway table beside me. Upstairs, I locked myself inside the bathroom and stared at my reflection beneath the harsh vanity lights. My face looked pale and older somehow. Exhaustion rested beneath my eyes like bruised shadows. For several minutes, I simply stood there trying to breathe normally while the truth settled around me piece by piece. This was not paranoia. This was not pregnancy hormones. My husband and my sister were not just betraying me. They were preparing for something. And whatever they had planned, they intended to make sure nobody believed me when it finally happened. After that night, I stopped reacting in front of them. That was the first real decision I made for myself in months. I stopped questioning Ryan when he came home late. I stopped looking hurt whenever Claire casually touched his arm during conversations. I even forced myself to smile during dinner while they carefully watched my mood like scientists observing an experiment. The quieter I became, the more comfortable they seemed. And comfort makes careless people dangerous. 3 days later, Ryan left his laptop open on the dining room table before taking a work call outside. Under normal circumstances, I would never have touched it. But nothing about my life felt normal anymore. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears as I slowly lifted the screen. The password was still the same. Our wedding anniversary. For a moment, that almost broke me more than everything else. Even after all this, he still used the date we promised forever to each other as the key to his private life. I opened his email first. Mostly work messages. Financial reports. Client schedules. Then I noticed a folder labeled medical. My hands froze above the keyboard. Inside were scanned copies of my prenatal records. Doctor visit. Summaries. Prescription information. Notes I had never seen before. One line made my stomach twist instantly. Patient displays signs of emotional instability linked to pregnancy stress. Recommended monitoring support from spouse. I stared at the sentence over and over again. Ryan had been speaking privately to my doctor without me there. Suddenly all those appointments made sense. The way conversation shifted whenever I stepped out to use the restroom. The sympathetic looks from nurses I could never quite explain. My chest tightened painfully. Then I found another document. This one was not medical. It was legal. A consultation request regarding temporary psychiatric evaluation during postpartum recovery. My vision blurred for a second. Attached beneath it was a short message from Ryan to an attorney. I need to ensure the child remains in a stable environment if my wife's condition worsens. Condition. As if I were already some fragile, unstable woman unraveling in front of him. I barely heard the back door open outside. Panic rushed through my body. I quickly closed the laptop and moved toward the kitchen sink just as Ryan stepped back inside. "What are you doing?" he asked casually. I held up a coffee mug with shaking fingers. "Just cleaning up." His eyes lingered on me for a second too long. Suspicious. Measuring. Then he smiled softly. "You should rest more," he said. "You look exhausted lately." I nodded because I no longer trusted myself to speak calmly. Later that evening, Claire arrived carrying shopping bags from a baby furniture store downtown. She placed tiny folded baby clothes across the living room couch while speaking in that sweet, gentle voice everyone loved. "Look at these little socks," she laughed softly. "They are so tiny." Ryan wrapped one arm around her shoulders while looking down at the clothes. It happened naturally. Too naturally. Neither of them even noticed the gesture anymore. I stood near the staircase watching them together beneath the warm yellow lights of the living room. Anyone walking by outside would have thought they were the expecting parents. Claire glanced up first and immediately stepped away from him. "Evelyn," she said. Carefully, "You okay?" I looked directly at her for the first time in days. Really looked at her. At the familiar blonde hair we inherited from our mother. At the same blue eyes I used to trust without question. Then I looked at Ryan. Calm, patient, prepared. They already had a story ready for the world. The emotionally unstable wife. The concerned husband. The supportive sister. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. They were not improvising anymore. They had been planning this for a very long time. The next morning, I drove to my prenatal appointment alone for the first time in months. Ryan offered to come, of course. He always offered now. But I told him I wanted some quiet time to clear my head, and to my surprise, he did not argue. He only exchanged a quick glance with Claire over his coffee mug before nodding slowly. That glance stayed with me during the entire drive across town. The clinic sat beside a small park filled with orange autumn leaves drifting across damp sidewalks. Mothers pushed strollers beneath cloudy skies while joggers moved past them with headphones and bright running jackets. Everything looked painfully ordinary. I sat inside my car for almost 10 minutes before going in, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I barely recognized myself anymore. My face looked thinner. My eyes constantly searched rooms now, like someone waiting for danger they could not fully name. Inside the clinic, the receptionist greeted me warmly. "No husband today?" she asked casually while handing me paperwork. I forced a smile. "Just me today." She nodded without suspicion and returned to answering phone calls. For some reason, that simple normal interaction almost made me emotional. During the appointment, Dr. Keller checked the baby's heartbeat while soft static filled the room. Strong. Steady. Healthy. I closed my eyes briefly at the sound. It was the only thing in my life that still felt unquestionably real. Then Dr. Keller sat down on the small rolling stool beside the examination table and folded his hands together carefully. "How are things at home, Evelyn?" he asked gently. My stomach tightened instantly. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Fine," I answered automatically. He hesitated. "Your husband has expressed concerns about your emotional stress levels recently." There it was again. Calm concern wrapped around quiet suspicion. I looked down at the ultrasound photos resting in my lap. "Has Ryan spoken to you often without me present?" I asked softly. Dr. Keller looked surprised by the question. "Only briefly," he admitted. He seemed worried. He mentioned emotional instability, confusion, mood swings. Mood swings. Confusion. The exact same phrases appearing everywhere now like fingerprints I could no longer ignore. I swallowed carefully before speaking again. "Did he ever mention wanting psychiatric evaluations after the baby is born?" For the first time since entering the room, Dr. Keller's expression shifted noticeably. "Not dramatic. Just alert." "Why would you ask that?" he said slowly. I met his eyes then, and something inside me finally stopped trying to protect Ryan. Because I found legal documents on his laptop. Silence settled between us. Outside the examination room, I could hear distant footsteps and muffled conversations from nurses passing through the hallway. Ordinary sounds. But inside that small room, everything felt dangerously still. Dr. Keller leaned back slightly in his chair. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "has anyone made you feel unsafe?" Unsafe. Such a simple word for something so difficult to explain. Ryan never screamed. Claire never threatened me directly. They smiled. They worried. They patiently explained why I was becoming difficult, unstable, emotional. That was what made it terrifying. I looked down at my wedding ring twisting slowly around my finger. "I think," I whispered, "they are trying to make me look unreliable before the baby arrives." Dr. Keller did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a notepad beside him and wrote something down. Then he looked back at me with a seriousness I had not seen before. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I need you to start documenting everything." A cold feeling moved through me instantly. Because deep down, I already knew something terrible was approaching. And hearing another person finally acknowledge it made the danger feel real in a way I could no longer deny. That afternoon, I stopped at an electronics store on the way home and bought a small indoor security camera designed for baby nurseries. The salesman demonstrated how it connected directly to a phone app and automatically saved audio recordings to cloud storage. He smiled while explaining night vision settings and motion alerts, completely unaware that my hands were trembling while I listened. I told him I wanted extra peace of mind before the baby arrived. Technically, that was true. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky had turned dark gray again. Rain clouds hung low above the neighborhood, and wind carried scattered leaves across the wet pavement. Claire's white SUV was already parked outside the house. Of course it was. I sat in my car for a moment watching the kitchen windows glow warmly against the stormy evening. From outside, it looked like a safe place. A home preparing for a child. I almost envied the strangers who still believed appearances meant something. Inside, Ryan and Claire were making dinner together. Claire stood at the stove stirring pasta sauce while Ryan chopped vegetables beside her. They laughed quietly about something before immediately going silent when they noticed me standing in the doorway. The shift happened so fast it almost looked rehearsed. "You are home early," Ryan said casually. "Doctor appointment went well." I nodded slowly and placed my purse on the counter. "Everything looks healthy." Claire smiled too brightly. "See? We told you things would be okay." "We." That word settled heavily inside me. Ryan walked over and kissed my forehead gently. The gesture felt so carefully performed it made my skin cold. "Why do not you rest upstairs while we finish dinner?" he suggested. "You look tired." Again with the exhaustion. The instability. The concern. Every conversation circled back to the same narrative. I forced myself to smile softly before heading upstairs. Once inside the nursery, I closed the door quietly behind me and stood still for several seconds listening to the faint sounds of their voices downstairs. The room smelled like fresh paint and lavender candles. Pale yellow curtains hung beside the windows, and tiny stuffed animals sat lined up across the white crib Ryan had assembled 2 months earlier. Looking around the room almost hurt now. It had once felt hopeful. Safe. I carefully installed the camera on the bookshelf facing the doorway and tested the audio connection through my phone. Clear. Sharp. Every sound in the room carried perfectly through the speaker. My pulse quickened slightly. For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides fear. I felt prepared. Downstairs during dinner, Claire talked endlessly about baby names while Ryan poured wine into her glass before realizing what he had done. The silence afterward lasted less than 2 seconds, but it told me everything. Claire laughed awkwardly and reached for the pitcher of water instead. "Pregnancy brain," Ryan joked lightly. I almost forgot Evelyn cannot drink right now. I lowered my eyes toward my plate so they would not see the expression on my face. They were becoming careless. Comfortable. That made them dangerous, but it also made them sloppy. Later that night, I pretended to fall asleep early while Ryan remained downstairs watching television. Around midnight, I heard quiet footsteps moving through the hallway. Then soft voices from the nursery. My heart immediately started racing. I reached for my phone beside the bed and opened the camera app with shaking fingers. The audio connected instantly. Claire's voice came through first. "She suspects more than you think." Ryan exhaled heavily. "It does not matter anymore. Once the evaluation happens, nobody will take her accusations seriously." I stopped breathing for a moment. Then Claire laughed softly. Calm. Relaxed. Honestly, she whispered, she is making this easier than I expected. I stared at the glowing phone screen in the darkness while their voices continued filling the room. And for the first time since all of this began, I finally had proof that I was not losing my mind. I did not confront them immediately after hearing the recording. That was the strange thing about betrayal. Once the shock wears off, silence becomes more useful than anger. For the next 2 days, I behaved exactly the way they expected me to. Quiet. Emotional. Tired. I let Ryan bring me tea in the mornings while Claire folded baby clothes on the living room couch pretending everything was normal. Meanwhile, every conversation, every whisper, every carefully rehearsed concern was being saved onto my phone. By Friday evening, I had enough recordings to understand the full shape of their plan. Ryan intended to request temporary psychiatric observation after the baby was born. Claire kept encouraging him, insisting my instability was becoming dangerous. Listening to them discuss my future so calmly felt unreal, like overhearing strangers plan renovations for a house they already owned. That night, Ryan invited his parents over for dinner. Claire arrived an hour early carrying apple pie from the bakery downtown. The entire evening felt carefully arranged. His mother kept watching me with soft, worried eyes while Ryan casually mentioned how exhausted I had been lately. Claire added small details at exactly the right moments. She forgets conversation sometimes. She gets overwhelmed very fast. We are all just worried about her. I sat quietly at the end of the dining table listening to them build their version of me piece by piece. Weak. Unstable. Fragile. At one point Ryan reached over and squeezed my hand gently in front of everyone. I just want what is best for Evelyn and the baby, he said softly. His mother nodded sympathetically. You are being very patient with her, sweetheart. Patient. The word nearly made me laugh. Instead, I picked up my water glass carefully and looked around the table. Warm lighting. Polished silverware. Family photographs hanging along the hallway walls behind them. Everything looked so normal. That was what made people like Ryan dangerous. They understood appearances better than truth. Dessert had just been served when I finally placed my phone beside my plate and pressed play. At first, nobody reacted. Claire was still reaching for whipped cream while Ryan continued cutting pie onto his father's plate. Then their voices filled the dining room speakers. Clear. Sharp. Impossible to misunderstand. Once the evaluation happens, nobody will take her accusation seriously. Silence crashed over the table instantly. Claire's hand froze in midair. Ryan slowly looked up at me, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw real fear enter his expression. Then another recording played. Claire's voice this time. Calm. Certain. She is making this easier than I expected. Ryan stood abruptly from his chair so fast it scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Evelyn, he said sharply, turn that off. I did not move. His mother stared at him in complete confusion. His father looked pale. Claire whispered my name softly, almost pleading now, but I simply pressed play again. More recordings. More careful conversations. Lawyer discussions. Psychiatric evaluations. Custody concerns. Their own voices destroyed them far more effectively than any accusation I could have made. Ryan looked around the table desperately searching for control that no longer existed. But the room had changed. Nobody saw him as the patient, loving husband anymore. Nobody saw Claire as the supportive younger sister. For once, the silence belonged to me. I stood slowly from my chair, one hand resting against my stomach, and looked directly at the two people who had spent months trying to erase my reality. I was never unstable, I said quietly. I was surrounded by people who needed me to believe I was. Then I picked up my coat and walked toward the front door while nobody at the table said a single word to stop me. Behind me, the house remained completely silent. And for the first time in a very long time, that silence no longer felt frightening.